This morning, our plan will be to read the entire chapter of Genesis 18. So that's going to be 33 verses, and then we'll back up and do the best we can to get through commenting on the first 15 verses. Now, this is the story immediately following the Genesis 17 narrative about Yahweh's covenant. Remember, he kept saying, "This is my covenant that I make with you, Abraham." He renamed him in that chapter. "And with your descendants, Abraham." And all right, we're in Genesis 18, and as I was saying, if you recall, immediately after Yahweh's circumcision, covenant of circumcision with Abram and his descendants, which includes you and me, according to Paul in the book of Romans, we are, he said, Abraham's offspring by the covenant, that is the new covenant, through the blood of Christ, which we are celebrating this weekend, his love, his grace, and his mercy in rescuing us. Now, in this chapter, in Genesis 18, Abraham and Sarah are visited by three men, the text tells us, but they're actually heavenly visitors who appeared to Abraham. And this is the text. Remember that Abraham had previously laughed in Genesis 17 when the Lord told him that he and Sarah were going to together conceive a child. Well, now Sarah is the one who laughs, and that's very relevant to two things, well, several things, but I want to point out two things this morning. Please make these connections. Number one, the word in Hebrew for laugh or for laughter is directly related to the name Isaac. That's where he gets his name. We're going to get into that, hopefully, this morning. And don't forget that this narrative, the covenant that Yahweh made with Abraham. Remember, Abraham's name is first mentioned in Genesis 11:27, immediately following the whole Tower of Babel incident. Remember, there's three falls of humankind. The fall from grace in the Garden of Eden, the fall that resulted in the annihilation of all living things, except for Noah, his family, and the animals aboard the ark, and the fall that took place at the Tower of Babel, which we've talked extensively about in this class. Immediately after the third fall, and by the way, things come in threes in the Bible a lot. It's a significant number, a grouping number. In Genesis 11:27, it says that Abram was the son of Terah, or Terah was the father of Abram. And that was Yahweh's, his heralding, his announcement right then. If you know the text, that immediately the entire narrative of Genesis shifts to Abraham. Now, this morning, the shift is being made through Abraham. We're not shifting away from Abraham yet. He's still most prominent in the story. But this morning, in concurrence with what the Lord told Abram in chapter 17, now in chapter 18, we have the ushering in of Isaac. Okay? And who is Isaac? Well, he's not only Abraham and Sarah's son, specifically, he's the son of the promise. He's the son of the covenant. Remember that by the time that the circumcision took place in the previous chapter, Ishmael was 13 years of age. But he's not the son of the covenant. He's not the son of the promise. Now, he's under the umbrella of the covenant, because why? Because every male in Abraham's household had to have been, was required to be circumcised, including servants and everybody else, right? So Ishmael, a lot of times Bible teachers demonize Ishmael, and it's true that there was violence that is coming in his life in the story against his neighbors. He's going to dwell right next door, over against his neighbors. His hand's going to be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. But that doesn't mean that Ishmael is not part of the covenant promise. He's already been blessed by the Lord. 12 rulers are going to come from him. The Lord is favoring Ishmael, but he's not the son of the covenant. This chapter, at chapter 18, ushers in the son of the covenant. Okay.
The Lord appeared again to Abraham near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. One day Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the hottest part of the day. He looked up and he noticed 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he ran to meet them and welcomed them, bowing low to the ground. "My lord," he said, "if it pleases you, stop here for a while. Rest in the shade of this tree while water is brought to wash your feet. And since you've honored your servant with this visit, let me prepare some food and refresh you before you continue on your journey." "All right," they said, "do as you have said." So Abraham ran back to the tent and said to Sarah, "Hurry, get 3 large measures of flour, knead them into dough, and bake some bread." Then Abraham ran out to the herd and chose a tender calf and gave it to a servant who quickly prepared it. When the food was ready, Abraham took some yogurt and milk and roasted meat, and he served it to the men. As they ate, Abraham waited on them in the shade of the trees. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" the visitors asked. "She's inside the tent," Abraham replied. Then one of them said, "I'll return to you about this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Sarah was listening to this conversation in the tent. Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time, and Sarah was long past the age of having children. So she laughed silently to herself and said, "How could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such a pleasure, especially when my master, my husband, is also so old?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, 'Can an old woman like me have a baby?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she denied it, saying, "I didn't laugh." But the Lord said, "No, you did laugh." Then the men got up from their meal and looked out toward Sodom. As they left, Abraham went with them and sent them on their way. "Should I hide my plan from Abraham?" the Lord said. "For Abraham will certainly become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. I have singled him out so that he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Then I will do for Abraham all that I have promised." So the Lord told Abraham, "I have heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah because their sin is so flagrant. I am going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I have heard. If not, I want to know." Then the other men turned and headed toward Sodom, but the Lord remained with Abraham. Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Suppose you find 50 righteous people living there in the city. Will you still sweep it away and not spare it for their sakes? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous along with the wicked. Why would you be treating the righteous and the wicked exactly the same? Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all of the earth do what is right?" And the Lord replied, "If I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city for their sake." Then Abraham spoke again, "Since I have begun, let me speak further to my Lord, even though I am but dust and ashes. Suppose there are only 40 righteous people rather than 50. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And the Lord said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 righteous people there." Then Abraham pressed his request further. "Suppose there are only 40. And the Lord replied, "I will not destroy it for the sake of 40. "Please don't be angry with me, Lord," Abraham pleaded. Let me speak. Suppose only 30 righteous people are found. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it if I find 30. Then Abraham said, Since I have dared to speak to the Lord, let me continue. Suppose there are only 20. And the Lord replied, Then I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. Finally, Abraham said, Lord, please don't be angry with me if I speak one more time. Suppose only 10 are found there. And the Lord replied, Then I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. When the Lord had finished his conversation with Abraham, he went on his way, and Abraham returned to his tent.
Thank you, honey. Very good. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to verse 1. Okay, what I'm going to do is, as usual, I'm going to make comments on the things in the text that a lot of things stand out. There's dozens of things. In the first 5 verses, I probably have 30 or 40 notes just in the first 5 verses. So there's a lot hiding in the text. It's not hiding, but it's not obvious in English all the time. Cindy, what version are you reading from?
Oh, I forgot to tell everybody. It's the New Living Translation.
Okay. I thought it was, but I'd never heard or read this text in the NLT, and the translators did a really good job of smoothing it out. That's always the thing. In translation, you can translate words literally, but when you bring them into English, a lot of times it's like driving down a rocky road, you know. So they did a good job of smoothing it out. All right, in verse 1, Yahweh appeared. So if you're taking notes, this is the proper name of the Lord, Yahweh, appeared. And here, the word appeared means that he visibly appeared. He showed up. And notice that it says Yahweh. It calls him by name. The first word, if you will, is Yahweh. But then people often forget that and they get focused on 3 men. So we're going to talk about that. Yahweh appeared, that is, visibly to Yahweh. And if you want to compare, if you're taking notes in your margins or in your notebooks, you might want to write down Genesis 12:7, where it also uses the word appeared. Genesis 15:1, where it says the word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision. So I'm giving you comparisons to the word appeared here, okay? So 12:7 is the word appeared once again. And 15:1 says that he came to Abram in a vision. And then in 17:1, the previous chapter about the covenant of circumcision, it says it again says Yahweh appeared to Abram. Okay, so near the great terebinth trees or oak trees, translators translate this differently. The terebinth is a tree that grows all throughout the Mediterranean region, and its species and subspecies. T-R-E. I'm sorry, thank you for fixing that for me. Terebinth, terebinth, th on the end. The terebinth is they can grow extremely large. The older they get, of course, and that's the reason why I've got a representative ancient tree up here.
Is that Rockport or is that?
Everybody asks if this is in Rockport, Texas, on the Lamar Peninsula. No, the great tree or the big tree in Rockport, its limbs don't sit down on the ground like this, or they would have if they weren't trimmed. But I'm guessing this one may be in Virginia, maybe Louisiana, but I doubt it because I don't see the Spanish moss in it. Maybe England. I don't know. I don't know where this tree is at, but you notice that in Genesis we keep hearing about the great tree of Moreh, the great, uh, the trees, the oaks, the terebinths of Mamre. So um, as I was in the Hebrew text, it's a little bit hard to figure out what's intended. Sometimes a translator will say tree, singular, sometimes trees, plural. I think likely there was a grove of old ancient trees here. The terebinth, by the way, are pistachio type trees. They're in that family, Pistachia. And so, and Mamre, for your note taking, remember that Mamre, Aner, and Eshcol in Genesis chapter 14 are brothers who are allied with Abram, and they are in league with Abram when he's fighting against Chedorlaomer to get Lot and his family back. And so we're going to see this tribe again, this group of three brothers, that they are constant companions to and friends with with Abraham. So Yahweh appeared to Abraham at the great terebinth or oak trees, and the term is plural, but scholars are divided about whether to pluralize it or make it singular for various reasons. While he, that is Abraham, was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Now, we think about a tent and we think, I wouldn't sit in the front of my dome tent that I bought at the sporting goods store in the heat of the day. I'd want shade. Well, there are trees, but also remember that Abraham's tents were grand, as are the Bedouin tents many times, especially amongst the wealthy Bedouin. And so he had every comfort available to him in that day. Verse 2, Abraham looked up and saw three men, anashim, three men, and that's what it means, men. But notice and compare, you might want to circle, underline, draw a line between the word the Lord or Yahweh and three men. Okay, so Moses here, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, very deliberately says that Yahweh is the one making the appearance. But now Abraham is looking up and he sees three men standing nearby. Doesn't say they walked up, it just says there they are. Um, hmm. And notice that as we read through the story, these three men are heavenly beings. It becomes apparent. But they have the form, they have the appearance, as in verse 1, of human beings. So what does the Bible tell us about the Lord? It says, well, God is what? Spirit, right? So he's not communicated to us in the Bible as an embodied being in the flesh, except that we see physical, visible manifestations of him various times in the Old Testament, as we talked about a few weeks ago, and when he's completely visibly embodied in the person of Jesus incarnate, when he came and was born of Mary in Bethlehem. So these beings are now visibly embodied. And we know from the text in a moment that they ate, that they sat down, they walked, they did these kinds of things. And so apparently they had substance to them, or they appeared to. So they're not only spirits, but they're now embodied spirits. And if you want to compare verse 2, you might want to write beside verse 2, like you could put V period, means verses, plural, 10, 13, and 17 through 22, and that'll give you your cross references within this chapter. When Abraham saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them. Notice he's portrayed as an old man, and he is, but he's not a couch potato. He's not laying on the couch with a remote staring at the TV all day. He's an active, busy person. still trying to father a child, and so another child, and does at later ages with Keturah, his third wife. So he hurries to meet them, that is, the three men, and he bows low to the ground. And I'm going to mention multiple times about honor and hospitality. The ancient Near Eastern cultures, as the modern Near Eastern cultures, were and are cultures that focus on honor and shame. They're not the only ones. Um, I was once told by a seminary professor who was teaching us about cross-cultural studies. He's a cross-cultural specialist, and he has um, a brother-in-law from Korea who's also a biblical scholar. And his brother-in-law from Korea told him that when the Korean national soccer team, I don't know if it was North or South, I'm assuming it's South because they were competing internationally without sanctions apparently. When they were competing internationally in a major soccer tournament and were shut out every single game, maybe without scoring, I don't remember that detail. When they returned to Korea, they put on their soccer uniforms, their warm-ups, and went and stood at a visible central location in their national soccer arena. And you know these soccer arenas hold 100,000, 150,000 people. And for the entire day, they stood there at attention while everyone filling the stadium booed them and hurled scorn at them. And that's as heartbreaking a thing as I can think of in our, in a modern culture. How horrible. But in the Oriental mindset, okay, so the Orient, where this isthmus is with this strait going through it, this is where Istanbul, Turkey is today. And this is where Constantinople was, the city of Constantine the Great. Before that, it was as it was formerly known. But right here at that place, this is where Orient, everything on the entire continent of Asia, meets Occident, not accident, Occident. So you might have heard of insurance companies and things that will use Occidental Life and Health or something like that. That's a geographical orientation. It's not ethnic. It has under its umbrella ethnicity, but the Occidental world is everything west of Istanbul. Everything east of Istanbul is Oriental. So it's oriented to the east. The Occidental world is oriented to the west, okay? And so in the Eastern mindset, including the Far East, and we know this. We already know this just from TV and media, but it's very important to them to show honor. I don't know that we do that as well in our culture. I don't know that we convey that so well. I think we might feel a little bit at times uncomfortable because we feel like that if we're too expressive, that it makes people uncomfortable. In their culture, including in the ancient Near East, they would convey honor. And what does Abraham do? He's bowing low to the ground. I think he's on his face. Okay. Here in the soccer stadium in Korea, they lashed out all of this dishonor, all of this shame. And then it's as if it was communicated to my professor by his brother-in-law. Once it was done, it was over. And now the team was restored to their normal position and could go on with life, hopefully winning soccer games. You may remember that in a plant in China where they were making baby formula, the baby formula poisoned a bunch of babies and they died. The next morning or a couple of days later, the CEO of the company was found hanging dead from the rafters of the plant. And we see that as tragic, and the Lord sees it as tragic. But in the Oriental culture, and I can't speak to this with authority, but this is very important to our understanding of what Abraham is about to be doing. Okay? The CEO or the chief of that corporation taking his own life now reset the balance. I am not recommending that. Okay? Suicide is murder. Okay? And we must not do that. Okay? But in the Eastern mind, he had to set things right again. Okay? So notice honor and hospitality, and I'm going to bring this up over and over and over again in this text.
Okay.
Yes.
So I've always questioned how it is that Abraham recognized their um, station or their who they were, because at a distance he saw them and recognized that they were worth honor, and ran to them and bowed to them. Is this just a cultural thing where you did this to all people, or was this something that he recognized who they were?
That's a great question. I think there's, I think the answer is sort of yes to several of those questions that you raised. um, if they in the culture, it would have been necessary to show honor and hospitality to strangers. Period. We see this in Jordan all the time with the Arab people, in Israel with the Arab people, in other nations with the Arab people. We show up out in the desert. We'll be in a van or on a bus, and we'll just pull over, and there'll be a Bedouin tent 100, 200 yards away, and they come running over there and come and invite us in to their tent. They make a fire. They serve us tea. They'll feed us. They'll frequently. I never thought of this till just now. They'll frequently. Cindy's version said yogurt. Some say curd. Some say cheese. Okay. Okay. They're all kind of kin, but I think this is coagulated milk. In other words, separated with with an acid like cheese or curds. But interestingly, they give us yogurt all the time in Arab cultures in the Middle East. Cindy?
You answered his question,
Okay.
but my commentary adds a little, which I thought was
Okay.
interesting.
Please do.
To answer John's question about how they saw those men and decided that they were worth honoring. Abraham was eager to show hospitality to these three visitors, as was Lot, in verse 19 too. In Abraham's day, a person's reputation was largely connected to his hospitality, the sharing of home and food. Even strangers were to be treated as highly honored guests. Meeting another's needs for food or shelter was and still is one of the most immediate and practical ways to obey God. It is also a time-honored relationship builder. In Hebrews 13:2 suggests that we, like Abraham, might actually entertain angels.
Yes.
The thought should be on our minds the next time we have the opportunity to meet a stranger's needs.
Excellent. Thank you for reading that. John, to continue with your questions, and this is where we're going to close. And Wednesday evening, we'll pick up in verse 3. Because Abraham was a herdsman, because he was a working man, although wealthy, although a tribal warlord, although a mighty prince, as he's called later in Genesis. And he has king-like status. If he were in a walled city instead of in a encampment of tents, and to say an encampment, that makes it sound lower than it was. Think of a city without walls where the buildings are tents, okay? But nevertheless, he was a humble man. I think he would have greeted anybody with hospitality. But it may be that these visitors were dressed in a way that maybe, perhaps, I'm just hypothesizing, showed that they had some station because of the extreme urgency of Abraham's actions, okay? We know from reading, Cindy's reading a moment ago, that he has a calf killed. There's quite a bit of work going on. And when we read how much flour he told Sarah to turn into bread, it's a lot. In other words, he wants to put on a grand feast for these visitors. And so we're going to get into that on Wednesday, God willing.
And I've always thought that similar to that, he would recognize them by their appearance. You know, maybe their camels were all blinged out. You know what? There was something there
Yep.
that he's like, those people are of station. You know, it's comparative to, you know, old worn out horse versus, you know, a big old stallion. You know, there's a pay difference there. So that's where I kind of figured that was something there.
There is something lurking in the text. There's a feel, isn't there? A vibe about this. And by the way, John, people of means do bling out their camels. Cindy is a camel fan. After going and seeing so many of them and riding them a pretty appreciable distance. We had to use them to get out of Petra. So we went miles on camelback to get to where we had to go. There's a backstory there. And if you see the camels of the wealthy, they've got some bling. They do. They're very colorful. So, and so do their donkeys, by the way. So good comments and questions.